Hello and welcome to this guide on loot filters. This serves as a companion guide to the max roll loot filter guide, so please do refer to that for any questions you might have or any additional information that you might want, or to go back over something that I may have covered but you don't quite remember. It's a pretty extensive topic. You can of course ask me questions in comments, but the quickest way to get the information is going to be almost certainly through the loot filter guide. So all of our max roll builds do come with loot filters already for anyone to use. However, there's still a lot of good reasons to know how the loot filters work. For example, if you want to make your own build, you're going to need to make your own loot filter, or if you wanted to adjust an existing loot filter, ours or someone else's, it's definitely going to help to know how the loot filter functions and how to navigate that filter to make any adjustments, or to create a new filter, or to even import or export filters, which you'll need to know if you're going to use max roll filters. So let's talk about what filters are, and then we'll go into the specifics about the loot filter in LE, so that you can get more accustomed with it. So a loot filter is simply a way to determine what loot will show and what loot will not show when you're playing the game. There might be items that are just not applicable to your build, or maybe they're just low value and there's no point in seeing them. You don't have any reason to pick them up. They're not worth selling to a vendor. They just don't have any value to you. And so having those things show up in the world just adds more clutter that is not necessary. A game like Last Epoch, especially, where there's a lot of loot, if you don't have a loot filter, it's going to make it a lot harder to sift through and find the things you need, whereas a loot filter will actually filter for those things to make sure that what you're looking at is only the things that are worth your time. So that's what loot filters do. That's what our filters do. That's what any filter that you can make should be trying to accomplish. All right, so how do you make, or how do you navigate the loot filter interface to begin to put in loot filters, or make your own, or really anything you want to do with loot filters? So let's start by looking at how to open the interface. So I actually have opened the game in the background here. Let's just bring it up. All right, and to get into loot filter, we just press Shift F, and there we are in. I currently have a filter loaded, but if I take a filter out of there, then this is what you're going to see. You're going to see loot filter basics, and it's going to give you some very basic information how to import or create a filter. We're going to do a better job than that. We're going to give you a lot more information to work with. Okay, so back to the guide. So to navigate, of course, like I said, we press Shift F, which will get us into the loot filters, and then from there we can select a filter from the drop down on the top, which is right here. From here we can take all of our loot filters, go through all the filters we have loaded into our folder, and we can select ones. This is a Dancing Strikes build, so I can pick the Dancing Strikes filter, and there we go. Now I have that loaded, and it's going to filter for me. Now the plus sign, which is right next to the drop down here, will actually let you create a new filter. So if we go in and we press this, we get to choose to create a new one. We can also open our filter folder to import folders in, and we can paste clipboard contents in case we wanted to actually bring in a folder that way. So you can actually copy and paste all of the code, so to speak, the HTML for a loot filter, and then paste it in that way. I don't recommend it, but it is an option if you want to. Okay, so edit duplicate is also an option we have that will allow us to do exactly what it says. You can duplicate a filter, or you can edit the options that are in a filter as far as description. So I can edit the title, I can give it a different description, I can change the color of the filter, or I can change the icon. If I edit, I will literally make a second one, or excuse me, if I duplicate, literally make a second one, of which I can then edit independently of the first one. I don't really want this one, so I'm going to go ahead and delete it. But that's a quick way if you have, for example, like we use a template, and so duplicating our template makes it very easy for us to go ahead and just make a new filter without having to create all of the rules all over again. All right, back to the max rule stuff. Okay, so that's edit duplicate. Add rule, and the rule window is definitely something you're going to know about. So that's just this area here. You see I've got a filter built in. I can go in here and I can add another rule if I want to by clicking add rule, and that brings up this screen here, which we will talk about in a little bit, and allow me to add a rule. I don't actually want to add one, so I'm going to take that out. This also shows me all of the different rules I already have set in my filter. Okay, let's talk about, we're going to move on a little bit, or shift a little bit from talking about the interface to how to export, delete, and import filters. Is going to be really important, especially if, for example, you're going to use one of our filters. You're going to want to know, how do I actually bring that into the game so that it works for me? Also, if you want to get rid of filters, I did talk about this in export filters, so we can just cover this again really quickly. So if you want to export a filter, the easiest way is actually to click this. You can, well, you can import stuff from here, export from here, and you have two choices. Copy to clipboard will take that HTML code and it will load it into your clipboard, and then someone else can, or you can export it into a different file. But the easiest way to do this by far is just open custom filter location. It's going to bring up this. It's going to bring in your filters, or your filter, folder, and then just find the filter. It's going to be named the same thing in here, and then you can copy and paste it that way. It's super easy to pull your folders. They're just an HTML file, so they're very easy to work with. And of course, we can delete filter. If you do this, it's permanent, so be careful. Don't delete anything you don't want to. But yep, that's an option if you decide you don't want your filter any longer. All right, importing and exporting. This is definitely important, especially for our builds, but wherever you might get your build guide from, they probably have a loot filter, and you're going to want to know how to bring it in. So for us specifically, we have ours on our pages here, and you'll find it, it's going to look something like this. And we're going to, so we're just going to be like, here's the endgame filter for the build. This is in particular Bowmage build guide. If you just right click on this and save link as, you will save the XML file. And from there, you can just pull it into your folder. So pull it into your folder. Again, you can go up here to plus, open your filter folder, and then drag and drop it in. And it's as easy as that. You now have the filter. And it loads automatically. You don't need to restart your game or anything. It's just there. Okay. Pretty simple. Covered that very quickly. Okay. Copying, pasting from clipboard. I'm not going to cover that here because I don't want to get into too much information that most people aren't going to do. But if you want to know how to copy and paste from clipboard, we do have that on the guide, so you can check it out there. All right. As far as creating a filter, it's also pretty simple. Hit the plus button. Hit create new filter. It's going to bring up this screen here, which allows you to name your new filter, provide a description, choose an icon, choose a color, and you can go. There's our new filter, just like that. Of course, it's empty, but it's now available for us. All right, so now that we have our filter set up, though, we want to add some rules. It's a very simple process as well. We just click the add rule button, and it brings up this screen here. Now, at this point, I'm going to deviate a little bit from the max roll guide. I'm going to cover the same stuff, but I'm not going to keep going back and forth. I want to kind of show how the add rule stuff works a little bit more smoothly. So I'm just going to go through these one by one. It should be pretty much the same way I covered in the guide, though. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at are the rule here and the visibility. So we have the options of show, hide, and recolor. So show just means if I make this rule and whatever drops on the ground applies to that rule, then I want you to show that item. Hide does the opposite. If I put some sort of conditions in here and it fits an item that's on the ground, it will hide it. We will not see it. Recolor is similar to show insofar as it's going to show the item to you, but it's also going to change the color of the drop on the ground. So every item has a default color. For example, a rare item will be yellow, a magic will be blue, a unique will be orange. If you use a recolor, you can actually choose what color it will be, make it something different. So you can make uniques blue if you wanted to. These are your options. There are no additional options currently, but this is what you have to choose from, so you can change it as you wish. As far as emphasize and character level dependency go on here, these do two different things. So emphasize will just make it larger on the ground. The icon will be larger than usual. We do use this a lot in our loot filter guides. Do bear in mind that there sometimes are bugs where it makes it look like gibberish, or even turns it into a black icon instead of being an actual text on there. It's just black. So be on the lookout for that. It does happen every once in a while. Character level dependency is something very different. What this does is says, okay, this rule that I have created, I only want it to apply when I'm certain levels. So for example, maybe I have a rule where I want to look for items that are valuable to me when I'm low level, but will no longer be valuable to me when I'm higher. Maybe it's for the first 20 levels, I think this is good, but after that, it's not really valuable to me. So I want this rule only to apply, maybe to show this item the first 20 levels. So we just go in here and we put, I do it actually 1 level extra because it seems to be how it works. So we put 0 to 21, and then we're guaranteed to see it for those 20 levels. If you wanted to do it for 15, I just put in 16, and there we go, 16 or 15 levels. If you want to see it for the first 50 levels, we just do 51. If you don't want to see it until like level 5, then we just put 4 to 51. That is a pretty simple way of making sure that your filters apply only when you want them to, as far as like the point of the game you're actually in, the status of your character. Oftentimes you're looking for something very different at end game than you are during the campaign. So this gives you that sort of customizability without having to go in and change it manually every time you want to switch it up. Okay, we'll turn that off for now. Let's talk about conditions. Conditions are where you're going to determine what the filter actually is looking for. So in this case, we have a recolor filter, and we're going to add a condition. We have these choices: affix, class requirement, level, rarity, item type, or none. So whatever we choose, let's say we choose item type. All right, now we're going to get to choose from item types what's going to be recolored white. So we go into here, and we get to choose from all the different item types in the game: idols, weapons, body armor, helmets, belts, boots, gloves. We can choose amulets, rings, like all those. That's what an item type is for the game. So we can go in and choose, and we can actually further drill down on this. So let's say, well, I want to see two-handed axes, but I don't want to see them all, because this is maybe for a higher level filter. This rule's for being a higher level, and some of the low level axes are just not very good, and they're not worth my time. So if we press confirm on that, we get a subtype here, and from here we can actually choose the specific axe item type that we want to see. So maybe we only want to see, for example, we're a bleed build, so we want great axe and bardiche, and those are the only ones we really want in this particular scenario. Cool, we selected those, we press confirm, and now this rule will only apply to two-handed axes that are of those subtypes and nothing else. Now we can add more conditions to make it even more complex if we want to. So for example, we have two-handed axes with these bleed things, but we also want to make sure that the affixes that are on them are good. So we can click on affix, and this allows us to choose the affixes that we want. So we are a bleed build. So let's just say we want to see bleed on here, or we want to see physical damage, or we want to see attack speed. Let's say we're a bleed build, so we want to attack quickly. So we choose melee attack speed. There we go. Now we have it set. So if one of these three affixes were to show up on an axe of the particular subtypes we've chosen, the two bleed axes, then we will see on the ground this item recolored in white. Maybe we don't want white because white looks like a common. Maybe we'll just change the color now to not be, let's make it red, which is what I usually use for items that are valuable to me. So we now have it colored in red, so we won't miss it. We know that's going to be applicable to this rule. We can do further things with this though. For example, maybe we want at least two of those affixes on us. We changed it with at least two. So now it's going to be the melee attack speed, the bleed, and the fizz. At least two of those three have to show up on this item, or else it's not going to be recolored to red. There's also advanced options. So this does get pretty advanced. You might not want to mess with this immediately until you get really familiar with the system, but it is here and it's available to you. So you can have tier of individual fixes. For example, let's say we want more equal. We don't like low tier items or low tier affixes, so we want it to be at least tier 3 for the individual affixes. So that means in this particular scenario, with this particular rule as it's set, we need to see two of those three affixes, and both of them must be at least tier 3 in order for it to be recolored in red. We can also choose total affix tiers so that we have even further control over it. So maybe we want it to be 7. So now not only do we have to have them at least tier 3, but one of them has to be at least tier 4, because it has to equal at least 7 for those tiers. So you can do a lot of more advanced things with these conditions. You can make these things pretty complex. Let's turn that off for now and just look at some of the other condition options that we have. So we also can do class requirement, or this won't really apply to two-handed axes, but let's say you wanted to make it so that you don't see anything except for the class you're playing, which is rogue. Well, what you can do is you can go in and you can create a hide rule, and then you can select Primalist, Mage, Sentinel, and Acolyte, and it's going to hide anything that is not rogue. So now you will only see the rogue items, and anything that does not apply to your class is hidden. That's a good use for that particular condition. We also have level. So anything that's below a certain level, above a certain level, a max level below the character. So that means if I'm level 50 and I put in 10, it won't be any lower than 40. And then highest usable level is also an option that you can use if you want to. So level gives you quite a bit of more generic ways of filtering items, and say going in and finding like a specific two-handed axes. Maybe you just put in two-handed axe and then has to be above level 40, and then you only see axe types that are above level 40. So that's one example of when you can use that. We also have rarity. So we have normal, magic, rare, exalted, unique, and set. And just like we could with class requirement, we can select multiples of these. So we can say, all right, these have to fit, I don't know. Let's say we don't want normal, we don't want magic. These are kind of irrelevant in this particular case. So let's just do rare and exalted. So now it won't recolor unless they are at least rare or exalted items in this scenario. And then we have actually, it's all the conditions. We have covered all the conditions. So those are the conditions you can work with, and you can mix and match them. Just bear in mind that however many conditions you put in here, it applies, all of them apply. So you will get items that will have to fit every single condition you put in here. It won't be like one or the other. It's all of them. So be careful not to make your rules too complex and therefore make it so you're not seeing the items you actually want. I do recommend, if you're making your own filters, to start off something that's maybe a little bit more open than you'd ultimately want. And as you learn how to use the filter to your advantage, you start to make it a little bit more strict, a little bit more specific to what you're looking for. All right, let's see. What else do we have to cover? We have covered all of these. We've covered all of the conditions, affixes, class requirement, level, rarity, item type. We just covered using multiple conditions. All right, so let's talk about rules. This is actually very important information. Okay, so let's just make this rule, and then let's add another rule that says hide, and we're gonna hide. Let's actually hide two-handed axes. So what we want to do, what we want these rules to do, right, is to say, okay, it's got to be one of those two axes that I want, and if it's not one of those, I want you to hide it. I want you to hide any two-handed axe that doesn't fit that condition. Now, the loot filter has a priority system that says certain rules take priority over others, and it's determined by what's on top. So if I set my rules to be like this, it's actually not going to show me the recolored two-handed axes I've chosen, because the hide rule is taking priority, which says anytime I see a two-handed axe, I'm hiding it. And it's just, that's it, it's hidden. There's nothing else to look at. There's nothing else for the filter to do. It has hidden those axes, and it's not going to look at the next rule. It doesn't need to. However, if I change it to this, now it will work the way we want, because the recolor rule is taking priority. So it's going to look at the recolor rule and say, you want me to recolor these two axes with these particular affixes, exactly as we set it up, with these tiers. Okay, this axe fits that condition, those conditions, so I recolor it. Good, that's done. It's not going to have to think about anything else for that particular axe. And any axes that don't fit that will just be passed over by that particular filter rule. It just doesn't apply. The next one will catch it and say, all right, this is a two-handed axe, and you said to hide two-handed axes, so this one's hidden. So make sure that you have your filters set up properly as far as order goes, so that the things you want to guarantee happen are towards the top, and there's no rules that are going to conflict with that above it. A good example of where I might use this, and where I do use it, is I always have a couple of rules in my filter. So I always have a show rule, oops, not item type, with rarity, with unique and set, and it can be exalted too. I often break these up into two, which is more for personal purposes. But if I have this at top, let's say I have unique, set, and exalted at the top, then none of the rules below it will hide those items, because those are potentially high value items. Even if it's not for this particular build, it might be something that's so good that I want to make another build, or it works for another build I have. And so by showing all of those as my very top rule, I can ensure that no other rule will conflict with it and hide things that I want to see in those rarity types. So this is how you can use it to your advantage. Another rule that I like on the opposite side of the spectrum, we can just, let's take this out. We don't even need this rule, because a better rule would be a hide rule that hides normal, magic, and rare items. What we're going to do with this one is we're going to put it at the very bottom. This is at the bottom. After all of the rules I've set, we make sure this is at the very bottom. And what that does is says, okay, if nothing else applies here, there's no other rules that apply to the item that's on the ground, I will hide it. So the show all unique, set, exalted is going to show everything. We don't need to put that in. Normal, magic, and rare are the only things we might want to hide with this particular rule. So there it is. We put it at the bottom, and now everything is going to be hidden. That doesn't apply to the rules above it. Okay, so that's how rule priority works. Now, you probably already seen, I was reordering rules, and all I was doing is clicking and dragging. That's how you do it. So if you want to reorder your rules, you make sure that the right thing is on the bottom and the right thing is on the top. You just click and drag a rule and put it wherever you want. It doesn't matter how large your filter is. You can drag very easily. I can actually drag that out because I'll probably forget, and that'd be bad. You can do it very easily to ensure that, or to order your rules in the way that you want them to be in. Now, where did I put that? Where example filter? There it is. Okay, example filter. Okay. Enabling, disabling, copying, and deleting rules. This one's pretty good too. So let's say that for whatever reason, temporarily, I don't want this rule to come into play, but I don't want to delete it because I might need it later. Simple as checking this box here. This is enable or disable. If I click it and I remove the check and the green around it, then this rule is no longer active, but it's still there. I don't have to remake it. Very good way of like just making sure it can do, especially if you're gonna, let's say one example of when you might use this. You make multiple builds with the same build type that you really like, shadow daggers. Looking at myself here, I've made many shadow dagger builds at this point. And so when I'm using a filter, I might decide that a particular rule doesn't apply to the build I'm running, but I don't want to delete it because I'm going to use this filter again. By turning off rules, I can then turn them back on later when I need them. Now, another easy way to make multiple rules without having to start fresh is a duplicate. So if there's a rule that's very similar to another rule, let's say we wanted to do something very similar but with swords, we can just duplicate it. So we duplicate this one. Oh, by the way, you can rename these too. So let's say we duplicate this. We're going to edit this name to be bleed axes. Call it whatever we want to do. That's bleed axes now. And then this one we're going to do swords. Pretty easy. We just go in here, we change this to swords. Let's say we keep everything else on it. We're just going to select the subtypes. I'm not saying you should do this, but for whatever reason, maybe we want fizz pen, sweet handers in there, which would make sense for a bleed build. And then maybe that's it. Maybe that's all we really want in there. So we choose that one. And now we also have a rule for swords, and we're just going to rename this bleed swords. It's got all the other rules already in. We didn't change the affix rule. We didn't change the rarity rule. So this is very easy to make. And now I've made two rules that are very similar, but not the same by duplicating. Now, maybe I decided I don't like swords in my build. I made that rule, but actually, no, the axes are just going to be better every time I've determined. I click X here and I delete it. So there we go. Now I've gotten rid of that rule. Okay, that's enabling, disabling, copying, deleting rules. I do have a basic loot filter example in here. I'm not going to cover this though in this guide because we've already went through all of the rules and kind of how to do them. And I've kind of made a little bit of a loot filter already. So this is going to be a similar concept. So if there's anything you didn't really fully pick up on in this video though, I definitely recommend checking out the example. It's pretty comprehensive here on how to make like a basic. It's not going to teach you how to make like an awesome, amazing loot filter. It's not going to teach you how to make our loot filters. I'm going to have a guide for that. But this will get you started on like, here's just how to get the basics set up so that you can start to put in your filter rules as you want, and you have all the basic rules already in there and ready to go. All right, that covers it for the loot filter. I hope this was informative to you. If you have any questions, again, please refer to the loot filter guide, or feel free to ask questions in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. In the meantime, enjoy your time in Last Epoch, and I'll see you all again real soon.